Welcome to the Web Design Business Podcast with your host, Josh Hall, helping you build a web design business that gives you freedom and a lifestyle you love.
Hey friends, and welcome into episode 200 of the podcast. Very, very cool to hit the second century mark. And I'm so excited for this special numbered episode to bring in a very special guest. We just recently revamped the title for this podcast to be the Web Design Business Podcast. And we're going to talk all about business in this episode with the CEO of Smart Passive Income, Matt Gartland. Now, on our first century episode, we had my very great mentor, Pat Flynn, on the podcast. And Smart Passive Income is Pat Flynn's brand. That is what he created and built his online brand through. And then you'll hear in this episode how Matt actually got to know Pat, and then they ended up teaming up. And then Pat eventually brought Matt Gartland here into Smart Passive Income as the CEO. And what I found out in getting to know Matt is one smart dude, especially in the realm of online business. So I recently found out and discovered that Matt actually lives in Columbus, Ohio, where I live. So I invited him out to coffee recently. We had a really good chat. And then I asked if he'd be interested in coming on the podcast to share with you about where online business is now, where it's heading, and we also talk a lot about a lot of trends that are happening in both online services, online communities, and even social media, and where things are headed and what he's seen with their brand, a huge brand with Smart Passive Income, and how Pat is kind of being the face of the brand and where his attention is, and then also what Matt is seeing as far as actually running the business and growing the team. So this was really cool. What an honor to be able to pick the brain of somebody who is at a very high level in online business. And I think the beauty about having a podcast is being able to sit down with somebody like Matt for over an hour and just talk about this kind of stuff. That's one thing I've learned about podcasting is you'll likely never get these type of opportunities until you have some sort of platform for them to be able to share it. And then to be able to share it with you and to pass everything that Matt and the team at SPI has learned, to share it and filter it down with you is just super cool. So I'm excited to see what you take away from this episode. And before we dive in, after this episode, if you want some help in your online business and building your web design business to make sure that it really becomes the tool for you to build freedom and a lifestyle you love, I would love to help you with that. If you would like me to coach you directly, you can go to joshhall.co/coaching. There's a special little offer there for you, and you can join my web design club where I do coaching. It is an amazing online community, so you do not have to do this alone. So go to joshhall.co/coaching for that. And here is Matt Gartland, CEO of Smart Passive Income. Let's talk online business trends, where things are heading. Buckle up, because this is a fun one. Matt, welcome onto the podcast, man. Great to see you again, this time digitally, not in person.
That's right. I am thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me, buddy.
I was really pumped to have you on. Initially, I was going to have you on just the podcast, but I found out you lived here in town with me in Columbus, Ohio. So I was like, we got to meet up. You took me to a great coffee shop. We had a good conversation, and I wanted to officially have you on the show. I thought it'd be just really interesting to just dive into trends right now in online marketing, and then specifically what you guys at Smart Passive Income have done with community. The community aspect is obviously something I'm really, really getting into and taking very seriously. So really excited to have you on, man. Do you want to let everyone know, first off, well, obviously we know where you're based out of, but I'd be really curious when somebody who doesn't know you, when they ask you what you do, what do you tell them?
I still don't have a good, crisp answer to this question after all this time.
I ask all my guests this because no one does. No one seems to have a really great, quick answer.
It's some combination of like, hey, I'm the guy that makes it all work. Right. So I've been running businesses, leading businesses for at least startup-based businesses for, a decade now after my leadership career coming out of like enterprise. So the quick story, if it's relevant, is that, I got my start kind of in, IT and that kind of side of the industry right out of school, right out of college. And had a really great enterprise career and learned a lot. I was in a leadership development program, but I think like a lot of us, right, a lot of us creators and entrepreneurs, I had that in me for so long. And I got to a point in my enterprise career where it's like, man, I need to commit to like leaving and trying to start my own thing, or like I'm on this track, in corporate America probably for a while. So I left and got into startups, and I'm so grateful that I did. And that journey has led me to meeting Pat and getting involved with SPI and the creator economy and all of that. So through all of that, I was a guy building teams, leading teams, a lot of times, websites, data systems, and different solutions that were helpful to people using the internet to gather and connect and do something, right? So I got into digital agencies, e-commerce, and a collection of different startups and experiences. And along the way, met Pat, got just really engaged with his work. And, kind of fast forwarding to today, I lead the business side of what we do at SPI. So building the team, leading the team, figuring out our strategic business plan, obviously working a ton with Pat on just like, okay, what are we trying to grow up still to be, even after all this time with SPI, and it has an amazing brand and a great audience and a great following. We're still learning, we're still evolving. And that's really exciting, especially with everything that's happening in the industry right now. And I think that kind of harkens back, Josh, to the question, right? Which is like, what are the trends and the things that are happening right now? And, my role in trying to like figure all of this out, because the landscape really has evolved and changed since, Pat and I started working together, around, 2010, 2011 timeframe. Okay. So, it's not just online courses anymore. It's not just, I dare say like a more simplified approach to funnel design, right? And getting people off of, public social networks, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, into an email sequence that's highly, highly automated, et cetera. There's a lot, I think, more nuance and more, I would say, discernment and analysis and even skepticism on the part of like the audience. Like people are being more selective these days. And I actually think that's an advantage to us as creators as we try to think about how we're building our brand and positioning our brand and the offerings that we're bringing to them, I see there being a lot of symmetry, at least in my, I guess, thinking of that, with how community has become such of like this really big thing now. Why it's so important, why there's a lot of interest, a lot of demand, new capabilities are being built, new technologies. So I don't think it's just community kind of popping out of nowhere. Again, like I think there's so many consumer interests and trends and behavior patterns that are evolving and kind of building up for the last few years, especially pandemic era stuff, that then like bang, like it kind of just unleashes, and like now communities like having this really big moment.
Yeah, and you just hit on an interesting point with the idea of our messaging and our products being relevant and more personal and kind of expected. It actually brings me back to the very first business book that I read, which was Seth Godin's Permission Marketing. That was the very first book that really resonated with me. And that was one that I read early on that kind of helped shape my entrepreneurial mind. I feel like there's kind of a resurgence of that, particularly in the wake of all the things that are going on with social media. It's like people want to follow and be connected with a brand that they feel like is personal, real, authentic, but it's also relevant and consistent and all the things that I'm sure we're going to dive into this. Now, I'm curious, what did the landscape, and actually kind of a two-part question, how did you actually meet Pat, and how did you come about, becoming your role in SPI? And I'm curious, maybe a follow-up question will be to see what the landscape looked like then. But initially, how did you meet Pat and get involved with SPI?
Chris Guillebeau is a great author and creator in the space that folks may know. And years back, he put on a wonderful conference in Portland, Oregon called the World Domination Summit. A little bit of a weird name, but it was super great. And this small, intimate gathering of, we didn't have this language back then, but what we would call today, the community kind of, folk. So I met Pat out there. We had a lot of common friends, I guess, in common. And, so we kind of bumped shoulders a couple of times in WDS year 1 or year 2. I'm forgetting exactly, but ultimately it was a good friend of ours, Adam Baker, who's with Steve Cam on the Nerd Fitness team, nerdfitness.com, that recommended me to Pat as he was trying to write his first book. And this was at a point in my startup career where I had a creative agency that was servicing what, again, we'd call today creators. So writers, authors, YouTubers, podcasters, doing a lot of content strategy, and then also all the way through content production. Pat's first book was his memoir project called Let Go. So he needed an editor, someone to help develop the the manuscript, that sort of stuff. And this was at a time you mentioned Seth, when Amazon KDP and books, and this was sort of having its heyday moment of like how can folks with an audience kind of manifest some of their story into yet a new asset to approach sort of a new distribution channel, which was self-publishing. Sure. Right. So we did really well as a creative agency in that sort of era, in that moment. We weren't just books, but, books was sort of one of our kind of like main vectors in. Like we'd work with an author and then sort of like, not in every capacity, but get an opportunity to work on other things. And that proved true with Pat. So, hit it out of the park on the project. And then, he just kept saying like, hey, I could use some more help with this other thing that related to his content work, just fell in love with what his mission was with SPI, started to trade a lot of ideas. We became fast friends. And then again, to kind of fast forward the story, it was just like, over time, we quickly just kind of became like, the business marriage kind of concept, mm-hmm. right? Like I'd help him with like business ideas and thoughts. And my view was always kind of like, I kind of became a pseudo business partner for a while. And we got to a point where it's like, why don't we kind of just make that formal? So at the end of 2018, we did kind of tied the knot and merged our companies together. And that's kind of where like, since then, we're kind of the two-headed friendly monster of the SPI ship, leading that forward.
And I saw you're in Times Square recently on a billboard, right? I think Pat posted that on Insta. Was that you, or who got that on there?
It was, we were both up there. That was with a great collaboration with a fintech company that's servicing the creator economy called Karat, K-A-R-A-T. And they're trying to solve a lot of the friction and the pain points for us creators, trying to get things like business credit cards and kind of your standard issue financial products. But when you go to a traditional, lending organization, bank or something like that, and I know this from personal experience, it's like, they don't understand us.
Yeah. Well, going back to the question of like, what do you do? I remember when I had my business as Josh Hall co-set up, they were like, what do you do? And I was like, okay, hold with me. Let me try to explain what I do. Like they were cross-eyed. They were looking at me like, what did you just say? So that's a great point. The traditional financial institutions, they don't get it.
So Karat's great. Eric, their founder, has been super generous for us. So he just, because we use the Karat card for a couple businesses actually. So SPI, our company's SPI Media formerly, and then a couple other ventures that Pat and I have in common. Like we have a Karat card. So Eric just pitched us on like, hey, like we're doing this kind of fun. It's just totally like a fun kind of PR campaign. And you guys want to be on a billboard? It's like, sure. So it was super great.
So you were working with Pat essentially as kind of a pseudo partner without it being formal until 2018. Is that right?
Yeah. And it was very natural. It evolved into that. It wasn't like that was the vision from day one that I had or that Pat had. It just organically developed. And I think that's quite frankly, like one of the best authentic ways to kind of prove out a relationship is you don't force it and you just kind of see what happens. And I think if I can bend it back to, as we're thinking about like what has changed in the internet in the last decade, which is a lot, especially in our space, is that, the attention economy is getting increasingly fractile, right? The noise out there, just because so many more people are producing and contributing to the ecosystem. It's, the barriers to entry are continuing to fall away across every vector, from podcasting to YouTube to TikTok to everything else. And people are, again, more discerning, more selective in their choice. So like to actually then have a thriving business, like we have to give more emphasis to the business side of the equation. My sort of view is that, when we look at creators and small media brands and things that are really succeeding and growing, they have a really great respect and balance or parity from the creative and content side, also with the business side. How do we think about, the business model? How do we think about doing the work, making sure that the work is profitable? How do we make sure that we have good financial practices to a reasonable extent, right? Especially if you're trying to invest maybe in new things and try to grow new things. So I think it's that balance that is, I look at that very truly as like an advantage for us, right? As like a strength that, over time, hopefully other creators can start to get into. Either like they learn some of, those more business ropes themselves, or they maybe find an opportunity to partner someone. There's different ways to approach that. And I guess I'm not saying that everyone should just partner up with someone else, but finding more harmony and more balance between just like the creation side purely with like thinking strategically about business and business development is a winning combination in my book.
It is. And it's a really, really important thing for my audience of web designers and web entrepreneurs, because I found this as a freelancer. I had to really balance working on the business and getting projects done and actually, growing my business to how I wanted to grow it versus sales and marketing and content and everything that was actually more outbound and me, getting interest and getting clients. So I do feel like I would kind of lump those together as far as content and business. I mean, sales and marketing is your content strategy in most cases. So it's a great point, Matt. You do have to, I think this is a good reminder. You have to focus on your business too and make sure you feed it and grow it. And so would you say that sometimes you almost have to limit how much content and outbound stuff you're doing and just refocus on the actual business? Because I know personally, that's one thing I do in my coaching. I have to tell a lot of my students, hold up. Let's look at your business and let's figure this stuff out first. And then once we have this in place, solidified services, et cetera, then we can go a little more ham with content and sales. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, completely agree with that. I think oftentimes for those of us that have digital based businesses, and not just like creators, maybe in the pure sense of definitely freelancers in a lot of different capacities, web design, web development, photography, kind of, any maybe digital oriented service offering, we can get over our skis, to kind of use that phrase, right? With just trying to create a brand and create sort of a persona or whatever and overinvest in that versus having, more of the inside of the house and more, the systems and the workflows and making sure that, this on the services side, how are we selling, our contract design? Are we selling the right service products or building into potentially service products that begin to give us some scalability, to the extent that that's desirable, in your service-based business, that sort of stuff. So absolutely agree.
Well, and I think if I could kind of pinpoint the biggest difference between myself as a business owner and entrepreneur now, as opposed to when I was early in the journey in like the 2010, 2011, 12 era, the biggest difference for me is I'm so much more focused on my current clients and I want to keep them coming back rather than just hustling after new ones. And in web design, this is one of the best things available to us because you don't need that many clients as a web designer if you keep them coming back and they pay you more and more over and over and over again. Was that a mindset shift that you had as well? Or did you feel like maybe the landscape has shifted in that regard from, a decade ago to now, to where there's more emphasis on keeping your current clients, subscription style stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Yes is the short answer. I believe it can manifest in a couple of different regards, maybe with a common or shared motivation around like retention or the notion of like longer term relationships, longer term engagements, longer term contracts. There's different ways that these things can pop up. And even on then the creator side with community, community is in part, not the only reason, but a big reason is this idea of recurring revenue. If you have a subscription model attached to your private community, that then like if you invest in the community management aspects with your programming, your experience design, other things, then you're trying to get LTV, right, lifetime value, right? So you're trying to get longer term relationships with the folks that you're inviting into your community. And Josh, you're a community builder also, so like you get that, right? But on the services side, in terms of trying to attract new clients versus, existing clients, like you're absolutely going to perform better. And I dare say like, you're just going to enjoy your work more, right? At least I always found that with my creative agency, that again, we worked with creators, authors, writers, bloggers, but then also even with, I had a different agency. I was a partner in the e-commerce world in my career that was servicing some really fantastic merchants and brands on the Shopify platform and kind of more on the high end, top of funnel side of I guess that ecosystem. And we always enjoyed having like the longer term, more strategic relationships in place, even with, DTC merchant brands. Here in Columbus, we worked with Homage. So anyone from the Columbus crowd definitely knows Homage. And we love just being invited to the table, like with them to think critically and think strategically about, okay, cool. Like we're working on this new web design release. And we did a lot of their web design for a period of time, even custom software development that was then deployed and integrated into Shopify's like native capability. So like I always found it more rewarding, again, to kind of have the depth of relationship and not just like, okay, cool, build me a thing and launch it. And then like, okay, thanks, goodbye.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, let's think, okay, cool. What's the next generation and the generation after that? And so there's a rewarding aspect. You have more predictable sales and revenue coming from those relationships. And it forces you to kind of just stay sharp in the industry also. So yeah, that's
great point. And
my view.
You're right. It's very gratifying to be able to do deeper, more meaningful work with people you already know, because you don't have to sell to them again. They already know you. They're already probably going to work with you. You just need to offer better services. And honestly, sometimes it's nice to be able to just work on your business instead of trying to hustle nonstop to get new client after new client. I definitely have seen the shift, I think, in web design in general for that. And it could be because more and more folks are used to subscription services. I mean, I have students who are doing a subscription web design model, which was unheard of when I got started back in 2010. That was, I mean, maybe some people were doing it, but it was not terribly common. So I think there's a massive difference there for sure between, a decade ago and now. What other things do you think are different? I mean, obviously community, it looks very different, but are there any other things that are maybe the biggest difference from a decade ago to now? Oh gosh.
Well, I do think subscription is something that maybe we should peg for a little bit longer and kind of stick on here. You just mentioned it.
Sure.
In the designer community, I actually just this week was told about designjoy.co. I hadn't come across his work in the past, and it's phenomenal. Apparently, he's doing remarkably well. I don't know him directly, so I don't know his inside operations and things like that. But from I would say proximal, storytelling and what I've learned, like just crushing it. And it's a subscription based model with like a lot of templates and a lot of configurable assets, and like using a lot of, I would say, like cross industry techniques. So like and this is a solo operation, I should say, at least led by like, just one designer.
Yeah.
But he has a little chat bubble. Like how many designers on their website have, the intercom oriented like little chat bubble on their website. So like, I think it's really interesting to think about, even in the designer community, like, this is maybe just one example, but like a subscription based model, scalable, extensible assets, whether you're a Figma designer or, you use some other tool, and then potentially building some community around that. I don't think he has here per se have like community, but other designers I know are, and even beyond designers, just other service professionals are scaling themselves a little bit in terms of then having kind of small group, coaching capability or something kind of tacked on to like the higher end services, that they might do on a one-to-one basis. Another designer, a good friend of mine, and you may know him, Josh, is Rafal Tamal. He's designed a lot of really impressive websites, especially for creators. So his website is simply rafaltamal.com. And he's also approaching or getting into more of this sort of business modeling where you can definitely hire him like one-for-one, and he is like pretty expensive these days. His work justifies it, but then he's moving into like other things, right, that he can sell, like small group stuff, or again, his own version of assets that he can sell off and then like customize or tweak or give feedback on. So it's an interesting like chess game thing to kind of think about. It's like as a designer, or if you're, any version of a just a solo service oriented entrepreneur. Yeah. If you want to, you don't have to, but if you want to, how do you scale yourself a little bit with some of these new business concepts, subscriptions based stuff, community, et cetera?
Yeah. And I know we talked about this when we met in person, but for me, I felt like my web design club, which is my coaching community, filled a really interesting need. And it was kind of a hybrid approach between selling courses in my case at scale, to where I might hear from the students if they emailed me or we did a Q&A or something, but I wasn't having too many like personal conversations. But at the same time, I wanted to be leery about one-on-one coaching because I know how time intensive that is. And it's just not scalable unless I'm doing, really, really high rates. So what I did was the hybrid model, which was my coaching community. So I was able to have this subscription style community for my membership, but it gave me a chance to have deeper relationships with my my students and with my members, and I could coach them in more like group coaching ways, and I could have a private chat. And I know I use Circle, and I really followed what you guys did with SPI Pro, and I joined that and then loved the experience as a member. So I was like, that's what I'm going to use for my membership. And then I've done the same thing with my support center for my courses. It's kind of like the SPI Academy, like you have. So it is kind of, it's super fun, I think, nowadays, because you can do a hybrid approach of whatever you want to do, whether you want to go purely at scale, or you want to go one-on-one at a higher price point, or whether you want to have kind of a coaching community aspect. And I know SPI is a little bit different, but for me, it's my personal brand. So my community is my coaching community. So that's where it fit in for me, at least, as I was thinking about what you kind of, visualized there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I see a lot of synergy and even melding, at least more so today than 5 years ago, 10 years ago, in terms of interest and even capability across different sectors of the internet. So definitely from the service side, there's a lot of folks that get their start doing service work. Maybe they even start inside an agency. They get good at a craft like design. They go out on their own. They start their own little solo design practice, right? But a lot of times that can lead them, especially again these days, into, I think like you, into like, cool, like I'm crushing it with service work, but I have something to say about the industry. I have something to say and teach about my craft. And I want to help others as a form of, yes, altruism, but also potentially like a business driver as well. So cool. I can also kind of step into this mold of being a creator. I can have a podcast. I can create a community, but I'm still a designer. I'm still a service person, but you start to move into other territory, right? But then on the other side, I think it's equally true in my opinion, in my view of what's happening, where folks that are getting started on the creator side and they sell an online course, or they just get really big on a social platform and then they sell ads or monetize themselves in other ways, they can, and a lot are moving into services, right? As another form of scale and a way to add value and deliver value. On the SPI side, we're not there quite yet, but yes, with SPI Pro in our community, like that's sort of a bridge to like, we could go farther and candidly, like we kind of are at least discussing it on the inside of like, cool, like if, beyond what we have today, and we're expanding our tiers very, very soon. We just have the one tier today as we're talking. Mm-hmm. But in July, we're launching, 2 new really exciting dimensions, so tiers of our SPI Pro community to service different needs at different, points in the journey, so to speak. But even beyond that, like, could SPI offer coaching at some point?
Gotcha.
Conceivably.
Well,
right?
I'll tell you this, Matt, in utter transparency, I was recently on with Pat for episode 563 of the SPI podcast. 2 people have reached out since then who are not in web design and asked for coaching. So there's obviously a big time need right there. I'm sure you guys have seen that.
Yeah, there's a need. There's an express need. It's genuine. We can solve that pain, help add value there. We need to, if we go there, and I'm not announcing anything, I'm not saying we are, but like, if we go there, like we have to make sure that, the team and the business can support it, that again, we don't get too far over our skis sort of thing. Like, right. It has to make sense. Cause the last thing that we want to do and that you want to do, or anyone that's really committed to, servicing the great people that we have in our midst, whether it's again, service-based clients or community members, or whatnot, is to get started with like a big promise. And then like something happens on the business side and we have to like pull back. Right. So yeah, we just want to get that right.
Now, I'm curious because when I started my web design club, I assumed that the only people who would join my coaching community would be current students in my courses. And my courses are one-off, just to kind of fill you in if you don't know, Matt. My courses are separate. They are one-off lifetime access, very similar to what you guys do with SPI and Pat's courses. And then they can come into my coaching community at any point for coaching. More recently, I have more and more folks coming into my community first and then diving into courses. So there's definitely, you used the word synergy a little bit ago. That's definitely what I've seen. What are you guys seeing with that? Are you seeing the same thing, or are most people in SPI Pro people in courses and then they, go into that? What have you guys seen?
I'd say we've seen something similar, is that we're moving into a space where by design, so intentionality, as well as I guess just, hey, we're looking at the data and we're seeing the trends and it's maybe proving certain theses that these new business constructs can and even should be multidimensional and multi-directional. So to your point, like you can have it one direction, sell courses, have courses promote and lead into community. That works. And we do that as well with our courses at SPI. But much like you also, like we have a ton of interest in just a community first. They come in there, but then that enriches an awareness and a trust factor that's really valuable. Then cool, I'm going to then go buy a course also, right? So there's now different ways into the apparatus, right? There's different ways like into your business based on how you're designing it. It's not just like, okay, it's only this direction, right? Like you can come in this way, you can come in this way, you can come in this way.
Yeah. Well, and the cool thing about that, I know for me as the leader of, my club, the coaching community, is it's fun for me to get a feel for somebody and to hear where they are and then to get a feel for really what they should move forward with and what they should actually do. And then I can say like, hey, go through my maintenance plan course. And then they are like fired up, they're engaged. I can even give them a deadline. I'll be like, come back in 2 weeks when you finish the course and then we'll wrap this up and then next step. So it is kind of a bridge to where I think you have a lot more control over the relationship when you meet somebody and have them in a community where you can nurture that and then send them to the courses as opposed to them just, maybe going through a course, maybe coming back, maybe not. So it is really interesting. I love that. I think that's super exciting that those two things can work really well together now. Now, for me, the biggest problem I have with courses and why I created my community is because people will go through a course and then they would drop off. I'd never hear from them again. So have you found that SPI Pro has helped that as well? Like for the people who maybe gone through courses years ago, have they come through SPI Pro? Has that helped with the, obviously it's all about retention, I imagine. Is that one of the biggest needs that you guys had for SPI Pro as well?
Yeah, it's one of the biggest pain points that then a community component does help to solve. It doesn't solve everyone. Like you're always going to have it. If you have a course and become a course creator, you're going to have that factor to some measure, right? You're going to have folks that start your course, at least a DIY course, and they're going to drop off. You can't kind of save everyone to kind of say it that way. What we have done is we actually have two distinct community like instances like you on the Circle platform. So SPI Pro is our private community. That's our subscription base. We have another called SPI Academy. SPI Academy is where students from our courses then, they have an opportunity to kind of land there and no additional charge. It's actually free. People can come into the SPI Academy directly. It's sort of our substitute even for like Facebook groups. We deplatformed off of Facebook about a year ago and migrated to then this SPI Academy community. So we have student centers and student kind of cohorts inside the SPI Academy that relate to our teaching topics. So email marketing and affiliate marketing and podcasting. And then we have, our courses that relate to that subject matter. And it absolutely has then helped, I would say yes, with the notion of completion. So students can kind of meet each other and like trade ideas and thoughts. And that kind of perpetuates, yes, engagement and ultimately trying to fulfill on complete the course. And then beyond the course completion, like put it into practice. Like, how are you doing? Right. So there's a safe space there that we're proud to provide and facilitate and nurture for our students.
Yeah. Now let's turn the tables back to new clients then and new customers for SPI. Yeah. I think a lot of people know Pat Flynn with just his entrepreneurial brand, and I'm sure that segues a lot of people from YouTube and the SPI podcast. Are there any other avenues that you guys are finding that works well for getting new people? Are there any different platforms you guys have tried out? What's working for new clients for SPI Pro or SPI in general?
Well, YouTube continues to be just a really rich, I would say like kind of top of funnel opportunity, just because of how YouTube has changed dramatically over the last several years and the fluidity with which, we're trying to create and adapt content, for YouTube. And increasingly, YouTube is just one of the biggest search engines, in existence. Yeah. So, we've been testing some things have worked, some things have worked less well. But just to kind of even again, invoke community, because it is one of the really, popular topics. And we believe it's not like a fad. We believe this is a trend. We believe in the, our observations of what's happening in the market and the industry and kind of where things are headed. So we're increasingly focusing a lot of content creation for YouTube, around community building and keywords related to community building, and being able to help other folks approach that topic through YouTube. So YouTube is definitely like a place where we're putting more attention, more resources, and trying to, discover new people and have, other folks discover us for the first time and kind of use that as a conduit in. Beyond. Oh, go ahead.
I was wondering what the difference was between the potential customer types between YouTube and the podcast for you guys. Have you seen, because I see a pretty big difference with the type of people who are watching my YouTube videos. For me, it's mainly people learning web design or more web design tips and tricks, some entrepreneurs, some business owners, but most of the entrepreneurial business owners that come to me come from my podcast. What have you guys seen any differences between the two for you?
We're beginning to. So I would say this is sort of like, the jury's out and we don't completely know yet. But in terms of, again, for YouTube and putting more content out there for community builders, we're starting to see some aligned expressed interest in that into then like SPI Pro first, into this notion of like, how are people kind of entering your business from different directions? YouTube is increasingly a place where we're seeing interest in the community first versus say courses, right? At least in terms of our business model. The podcast has always been an effective way to promote courses, either just because we're interviewing another course creator, or we do have ads, on our podcast, especially Pat's flagship show. We have a couple other podcasts at this point. So we can see a lot of lift on just course sales through the podcast. So again, like a different entry point, a different business metric to kind of look at. Social, I would say, is not our strong suit in an interesting way. Like Pat does well personally, and most of like our social, so to speak, is like just Pat's personal feed, so we don't track too much, at least not yet, like from social network. We are still trying to figure out like, how do we want to show up as a brand as SPI with maybe me and maybe Mindy and maybe Jill, like other folks on the team, and have a more like Avengers sort of an approach to like how we want to show up on social as like Team SPI. Right. So that's sort of still in the workshop. We haven't completely kind of figured that out yet. So, but, to your core point, I think there's absolutely truth, and therefore like, let's, advocacy here, but like, think critically about, okay, if I want to show up on YouTube and I also want to make investments and show up on TikTok or have a podcast, what is that strategically pointing to? Like, well, is there a central thing that like, okay, if I do this well, I'm going to promote, client, expressed interest, client, inquiries or submissions or application, whatever the mechanic is, right? Like, where are you leading people out of these channels to hopefully take some action with you on your website, or do something else that kind of then promotes, new client opportunities.
Well, and regarding socials, that's why I pulled my support groups from Facebook as well. Similar. I did it like right after you guys did, just because I liked the model. It worked. And I knew a lot of my students were saying, I'm not on Facebook. So I'm bummed I can't get the student support center. So that's the beauty about having a tool like Circle, to be able to have that and embed it anywhere. You can embed it in your website or have it standalone. That's definitely one of the main reasons I wanted to have an agnostic program. That way, if someone's just on Insta or LinkedIn or Facebook, whatever, you can still be here. For you guys, are you doing any other, like, are you doing Google ads or anything like that? Or is it pretty much just YouTube and the podcast?
It's the podcast, it's YouTube. Again, it's Pat's like personal social channels, and we dabble in a couple of other areas, but concerning Google ads specifically, no, we don't do that. We try to be very, I would say, light in our approach regarding ads. We have tried ads. We have tried Facebook ads in the past. It's not something that I have found empirically to really move the needle for us, effectively, different reasons. I'm not saying that Facebook ads don't work for certain brands in a certain market with a certain offering. For us, we have just not found that a worthwhile endeavor. And also, quite frankly, void of even just the empirical side with numbers is Pat and I just don't really believe in it as much, right? Just like sort of like how we want to have the SPI brand manifest and the sort of, customer journey that we're trying to build. Will we get back into testing some ads? Sure. But if anything, we'll probably more lean into just podcast ads and try to do more, honestly, like the native advertising notion where we can like tell a story, and be able to like say something through audio and maybe have more of that kind of pop up on other shows. Like we feel like that's a little more congruent with just our ethos as a brand and how we want to show up.
So show up, that term, it's kind of interesting now. I feel like more and more of my students have asked about how to show up, particularly those who are a little more introverted at heart and they don't feel comfortable being on all the socials and stuff. What are your thoughts on that for people who, like I tell everybody, if you are going to be the only person in your business, you have to put your sales hat on, whatever that looks like, whether it is more organic, like the strategies we've talked about, or whether it's intentional ads or whatever it is, like you have to be the salesperson. What are your thoughts on that for people on how to get out there? I mean, it's kind of an open-ended question, but it's really important now because a lot of people want to grow their own business, have their own online business, but they're like, I don't want to be an influencer. I don't want to be Pat Flynn necessarily. And maybe I do want to be somebody, just work with people, but you got to get out there at some point. What are your thoughts on that?
Several thoughts. And in the way that I look at it is it's a lot of like, yes, and sort of thinking here. So, as a starting point, if you run your show, if you're a solopreneur and you do, freelance design, and then you even want to maybe, again, hybridize like you have, Josh, and to grow into a couple of different areas, you got to show up. So like first level, like first rung on the ladder is like, you need to choose one place and start to show up there. And there's no, at least for me, like, I guess, moral judgment or any dogmatic choice of like, you must show up here first, like choose for you. If that's YouTube, if that's podcasting, if that's social, if it's Instagram versus TikTok versus Twitter, I don't care. I think it, that should be very much like as much as possible, like listen to yourself. You need to show up, you need to overcome that, but like overcome that in a place where you feel the most willing to kind of make the effort and learn the ropes and try to build some consistency. And it's very okay if you never go to YouTube, but you need to show up somewhere and start to kind of build some momentum there. So that kind of steps into, in my brain anyway, kind of like the first yes and to the second point, which is just, build momentum somewhere once, like find one channel, right? And kind of start to get some traction, have some success. That'll build confidence. It'll build a rhythm. You'll start to build an audience in some capacity, right? That then should you choose to and go to a second or a third channel, then you can start to seed those channels with the success you've had on the first. But always throughout this, be listening to yourself. You don't have to show up in every dimension always. But you need a story. You got to improve your storytelling skills, again, whether that's in writing or audio or YouTube. I personally don't overly enjoy showing up on video personally, and I have no interest in being an influencer. I mean, that's Pat. I run the company, I lead the company, and I'm trying to do business to business deals, and other things. That's my responsibility set as the CEO. And Pat's more like full-time creator again. That's intentional. That's by design. So Pat needs to show up, and he loves it though. Like he loves being on video. He excels at it. He's, in my opinion, one of the best at it. So that's where we need to focus his energies. There's alignment there. I need to be showing up in other capacities. I love podcasting. So I'm trying to do, Josh, like honestly, more of this. Like I need to show up on other people's shows more frequently to kind of bring some balance to even like Pat showing up. I should have my podcast again. I had one years
nice.
back. I had a show actually during my creative agency days that did reasonably well back then. But I haven't like had a show in like 5 years. It's like, well, frick, I should do that again. So like I have a concept. Pat's very supportive of it. He likes it. So, I'm working on that. And I got to get back out there. And because audio for me is like, this is my love. Like if I'm going to express myself and try to foster communication and build, a lot of great relationships, I'm going to go audio. So that's me. So, for the folks listening that are designers, like, my gosh, maybe you want to show up on Instagram, like, or do other things that kind of have a more design orientation to them first. But ultimately, show up once somewhere, build some traction and momentum, and then you can think about scaling from there.
That's great. Now, before we went live, you and I were talking about doing potentially like a quarterly meetup with other creatives here in Columbus, in-person meetups. Because I built my business 100% through referrals in my networking group and my Chamber of Commerce here locally. I was not on any I did have a Facebook and stuff, but I was not a content creator, video guy until I started teaching web design. But I did build my business 100% in person. What are your thoughts on in-person stuff now? Do you feel like COVID has ruined in-person things, or do you think there's a resurgence to where in-person things are going to be 10 times more valuable now than they were before?
Well, I definitely don't think it's ruined it. And if anything, I do think it has just added more magic to the opportunity to get back together in person. I don't know if it's 10x in value. I don't know what the multiplier would be, but I do personally have a sense myself. I've heard this from friends, that again run in circles like ours that are creators or solopreneurs in some capacity, that it's irreplaceable, and we miss it desperately. A lot of us, I dare say, maybe most of us, from the last 2 years of pandemic living, and definitely a standard asterisk here is that we're not maybe all the way through it. So like your standard precautions. But increasingly, I think that we're hopefully getting close to a time where we can be thinking about leveraging, in-person gatherings again in a lot of different ways. And I think hopefully, being able to do something here in Columbus is going to be super fun. And, it adds sort of, another variable here that's critical, which is just like that personal motivation factor. A lot of us are in this, to meet other people and just like meet other people like us, right? And kind of find our little, our group, right? Yeah. And doing that in person, and then just more organically, naturally thinking about like word of mouth referrals and other things, like a lot of that can be born out of that. So I think it's going to help a lot of folks again to get back out there in real life and engage in little mastermind groups or meetups or more formal event types, whether you're hosting them or you just join them in your local communities. I think that's going to be really important.
Yeah, for me as a WordPress guy, WordCamps are massive, and I definitely have missed having any of those in person. I don't know if this year in 2022 if they're going to start back, but I would imagine over the next couple of years they'll start to do more in-person events, because there's just something so powerful about meeting with people in person. And I know I've heard Pat talk about this, where it was FlynnCon, right? That happened like a year before maybe the pandemic. And then I know
that happened in 2019, the summer of 2019. Okay. Yeah.
And then I had heard him talk about SPI Pro being an idea that you wanted to keep that community aspect that was there virtually. So I'm curious, do you guys have any aspirations to do like meetups or in-person stuff through SPI Pro for SPI Pro members? Is that something that is in the forefront?
Yeah. Through SPI Pro, yes. We haven't, I would say, like solidified on a particular event with a lot of structure and a date. Like we're not quite to that extent, but with the exciting new tiers that are going to be coming here very, very shortly, I'll be driving on one of those new tiers, which is a higher end tier that is more on the business side right now. Not exclusively, but a lot of the community programming and engagements that we have in SPI Pro revolve around some aspect of audience building and marketing, and rightfully so. But anywho, like the potential like way in vector into in person is through like a more structured like business program that maybe is an extension of what we'll be launching in terms of the community, more around business concepts, strategic planning disciplines, and other things like that. So we're very excited for that as a proving ground, right? And then like, okay, cool, if that works, we have high hope actually that it probably would. Then how could we begin to scale off of that into other things? And maybe that would lead all the way back to like something of a larger sort of like SPI Con sort of an event.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking through that because so many of my members have asked about getting together in person. I would love that. We're quite scattered. I mean, it's a global community all over the world. So I don't want to make people fly to Columbus, Ohio for, drinks for 3 hours or coffee one morning. Like I want to make it, if we do it, something that is going to be a weekend long thing or something that's going to be very well worth the time. But it is kind of interesting. I was just kind of curious where your head was at with in-person versus virtual and what that looks like now. Yeah. Obviously options are endless. So cool.
Yeah. One more thing in that, I guess, space is that other conferences are thankfully coming back online. For example, in the creator space, ConvertKit, email marketing platform that a lot of creators use, has an event called Crafts Plus Commerce that they had run for several years, based in Boise, Idaho, and that's where they're based. And like most everyone, like kind of took the last 2 years off because of the pandemic, but they're coming back with that this year. So there's always this opportunity, especially with folks like us that have distributed audiences and whatnot, that maybe we're not at a point yet based on our own capacity or finances or other factors to like put on our own big event, is like you kind of can think about a bolt on to another event. So like with ConvertKit, we know that a lot of the folks that, maybe are a part of our community or, listen to us and are part of our audience probably know of ConvertKit, might have an expressed interest there. So cool, maybe we could all gather there, and then we could put on like a special dinner or some sort of like unconferencing sort of thing that kind of is in addition to like what, in this case, hypothetically like ConvertKit's doing. We could use that as just a gathering spot, right? So like there's different ways to kind of think about like the when and the where we may want to gather.
So partnerships and that idea of working alongside other brands that can be mutually beneficial. One thing I'm really curious and fascinated by is when to like partner up with somebody and when to just refer somebody. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have any like red flag advice for people who, because even as web designers, like you might be able to partner up with an SEO agency if you don't do SEO, but they could do your SEO, you could do the design. Whereas sometimes you might want to just refer it out completely. I was just curious to see if you've any lessons or gold nuggets of advice in regards to partnership versus just referrals.
Yeah. Also probably a number of things that come to mind and I could share.
That's definitely a whole other episode, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's good. Like partnerships, I think is honestly an under-celebrated and underdeveloped aspect of business still. Especially in our realm of like small business and solo-based businesses and service-based pros and even creators. Like we have partnerships on the SPI side with like tech platforms. Circle is one of them, and there's like for our business model, affiliate income is still, or affiliate revenue is still, relevant to some degree. So from Circle, from Teachable, from ConvertKit, and from other notable platforms that we use ourselves and trust, et cetera. But on the services side, it's interesting, and based on my service career, with two agencies, in the past, and I even advise another, is that there's an important line there where build those relationships. But I guess if I'm trying to distill it to any maybe piece of advice, it's the responsibility factor. So like if you're just yourself a designer, how much additional perceived responsibility might you be taking on in a way that maybe you don't intend to, if you aren't just like, to your point, Josh, like referring it out and then like that's it, versus like trying to partner and then like say you're bringing a web developer, into the mix, right? So it's your client, you're doing the web design, you bring in a web developer to help build out your design. Are you on the hook for that? Is that your responsibility? So like where's the line? And if something goes wrong, like are you on the hook for that, or is the perception weird? And then like your relationship with that design client gets maybe a little bit, it gets a little bit tough. So yeah, I think it's tricky. So I would start slowly, but with like a vision and a mindset of like, yes, partnerships are a good thing, and test the waters and maybe do more like referral out, and then listen to your client, right? Listen to like, hey, like that developer you just referred me to, like they did a bang up job. Like love that. Thank you for recommending me. And if you do that a couple of times over and there's a consistency factor there, then maybe you try to like take that up a notch, right? With that developer, and say like, hey, like maybe there's a little bit more we could do here in a partnership capacity that has like different economics involved, or there's we could go down that rabbit hole for a whole other episode. But yeah,
sure.
I would say start slowly, but start like with optimism and start with intention, because partnerships absolutely in different like molds and capacities can be just an absolute godsend for folks like us.
Yeah. No, we talked about this in person. I think it'd be worthwhile diving into here as maybe something that I'm looking to in the future, and maybe some of my audience are, but an advising role, like an advisorship role, whatever the correct term is. What does that look like for you guys? Does that come organically? Do people are you getting hit left and right to be advisors? Do you say like, we're open to advising a certain amount of clients per quarter? Like, what does that look like I know you're advisors to Circle, a few others. What does that look like for you? And what are some tips for if anyone's curious about that path?
Yeah. So with Circle, with Podcast Hawk, and a small little portfolio of others that Pat and I co-advise, those are tech companies, right? So the approach there, the deal structure, the economics, that's all going to be very different because they're tech companies as compared to if you're advising, say, a service-based business or an agency or someone else kind of in that capacity. there is an open source document that we leverage for our work called the FAST. It's the founder, let me make sure I get this right, the Founder Advisor Standard Template, FAST, from a very reputable organization called I think it's just the Founders Organization. So we leverage that as our sort of starting point when we're trying to broker and begin to formalize some of these relationships. So you can Google for that and you can find it. We use almost that language verbatim in terms of the stock language in the upfront agreement. And then there's modularity in the back end of that agreement that I have customized to be more consistent with like the approach that Pat and I take in our like unique value and kind of surgically where we apply ourselves. So we've customized the back end of it, but the front end of it is all like pretty much, the stock language. And that's been very useful again with like tech companies and our ability to bring a lot of our wisdom and experience from building audiences in the creator economy, different forms of content and media, to then, for us, a very interesting market segment in tech, which is, even to kind of call back to the billboard that you caught attention of, so Carrot, being the company that made that happen, they're a fintech company, which fintech is blown up in general right now, but they're like cool, like fintech for creators, right? There's a lot of other companies, tech companies in different market segments that are like cool, like our target audience, so our target customer are creators though. And Pat and I just have found ourselves in a really thrilling kind of not overly unique, but unique-ish position where like we kind of operate at that intersection of tech companies, especially like in some cases really well-funded tech companies, and they're trying to get into the market that we know inside and out. So that's us.
Gotcha.
On tech companies, but in terms of like other service-based pros and designers and trying to get involved, if that's something that's of interest. You can have advisory deals that are more kind of on the cash flow side, which I guess I should say that with the FAST, it's more rooted in, restricted stock and kind of getting into almost like angel investing and equity plays and stuff like that.
Okay.
But you can have advisory opportunities that are based in it's essentially a service model, right? Mm-hmm. So even what Pat and I do, like it is services. We declare through the FAST, like what services we provide. And it's an interesting way to think about like how even us, like, at some point, we all are doing services. So for, designer pros that are doing service work, and if there's that interest or that vision, are there tech platforms, that are design oriented that if you get to a certain size, you could consider trying to build that out, or just to each other, advising other design studios or larger design studios, can be just another thing to kind of have like a service offering, probably at a higher tier. Yeah. It's a fascinating way to kind of think about scaling yourself.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I find myself, as you were talking about all that, I'm essentially an advisor or consultant. I don't know if those two terms are interchangeable or not, to my old web design agency. So I actually sold my agency in 2020 to one of my students, and it wasn't a sexy sell. My student Eric, who's my CEO now, he didn't have capital to pay me a lump sum, but I knew I wanted to teach full time and I just had to make that decision. So we essentially just worked out almost like an advisory deal for a certain percentage per quarter, through a certain term or till I hit a certain amount. So that's kind of the deal I struck with him and the agency. That way I can still have a pulse on it. I'm still consulting. I still, I can see all the numbers, all the books, but I can refer to him what's working, what's not working. He's letting me know, some of my old clients, how things are going. So I kind of found myself fumbling into an advisory / consultant situation. It just got my interest peak for maybe one day down the road as those opportunities come, like what that looks like, which is kind of cool. Kind of interesting.
Yeah. Which is fantastic. I remember you telling me the story privately. So congrats again on that. It's really rewarding. At least I found, and not to speak for you, but I think you feel that also, right? With just like the ability to still give value back, right? Yeah. You kind of still have that relationship structure there, which to me is more consistent with the term advisor than say like consultant. So I do think they're pretty similar. So much of them, again, it is a form of a service offering, but how you define that on paper, how you structure that, what the expectations are on both sides, how you show up in that relationship structure. Advisory for me makes more sense to think of it that way. I feel like I have an opportunity to almost care more, right? Like it's less transactional. Consulting feels more, stiff, or it's more like McKinsey coming in as a really big, management consulting firm, or, something like that. Like that's not me. I'm going to be selective. I'm going to advise people that I really believe and trust in, whether it's an individual or, a tech company that's targeting creators that I really believe is adding value to the creator economy, whatever it is, if I'm going to be an advisor, like that matters. Like if I'm going to hang my hat on that, like I'm going to be really selective, and hopefully the other side of the table feels the same way. And if they don't, like, that's okay too. That's even a good like barometer test. If they're like, oh, like we just want you to like, make intros all the bloody time. Like that's a part of it. And, this is me being opinionated, but like, I'm not in it just to like make an intro. Like I want to give feedback. I want to like kind of be more in it. That's my take on advisory.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I guess advising could almost be like coaching in a way. Like if you're, sharing tips and ideas, I guess there could be a lot of overlap there, although it's very different on your level as far as advising Circle versus coaching a web design student. But
Sure. But I at some point it maybe all becomes marketing. I don't know. Yeah. It's like what language do we choose to use to try to represent ourselves and sell ourselves? But it's also the construct, right? So if you're trying to build a small group thing, with 5, 6, 7, a dozen designers, and you're facilitating that, that's maybe a little bit more mastermindy or small group cohort oriented. Yeah, I think coaching is a more appropriate sort of description of that than like say pure advisory. But yeah, advisory is like you are advising, like it's kind of baked into the model.
Yeah, that's so interesting, man. Well, this has been really cool, Matt. I've super enjoyed it. It's been a quick hour already.
I know. Oh my gosh.
As we get ready to wrap this up, I'm just curious, because I have one final question, but before we get to that, I am curious, when you guys at SPI look at your customer types, because this is something I'm going through right now. I'm finding that my like ideal customer is kind of evolving a little bit. Open-ended question again, but what have you guys learned when you think about your customer avatar or whatever, or ICA, your ideal customer avatar? Yep. When you look at that, has that evolved for SPI? And then what have you learned on how to make sure you're producing the right content, courses, all the things for the right person?
Yeah, fantastic question. Thank you. Great ending spot as well. So 2 things that point into the same thing. One is a service professional who wants to become a creator, right? Or begin to have, as an extension of a service-based offering and a service-based business, whether it's like project-based services or coaching or a collection of that stuff, they want to get into creator, and creator meaning growth of audience, right? Podcasting, YouTube, and more potentially passive income oriented assets like online courses or other forms of, again, passive monetization. So service pros into having a creator element to their business is one path that is very clear. This happens a lot. There's a pattern. So this is more, as we were talking about previously, like, going from service into creator versus creator into services, right? So that's one direction, and one kind of ideal customer type is to find established service-based pros that kind of want to grow and scale in that way. Mm-hmm. And the second is the more potentially traditional version of someone that's seeking to replace a 9-to-5 career, right? That is doing well and wants more independence of time, of financial independence, more freedoms, right? And they want to go creator first. So don't necessarily want to get into the service game, or at least not first. They're more interested in building out the course side, the audience building funnels into, passive assets, that sort of thing. So both roads kind of leading to the same interest of like, how do I build a part of my business or a business by itself that's more kind of creator oriented? That's still the common denominator, but 2 different like customer avatar types.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I always kind of wondered if I was like your perfect ICA, but it sounds like I'm a little bit of an outlier, because I've taken, which by the way, while I have you, thank you for your awesome work with Pat and with SPI, because your resources have been game changing for me, from the podcasting course, the webinar course, SPI Pro. Like recently, I wanted to ask about podcast sponsorships. I don't know anything about that. So where did I turn? I went to SPI Pro because I knew a lot of people in there were taking podcast sponsorships. So, and I didn't really have any colleagues that knew too much about it. So there's so many resources that have been, massively impactful for me. So thank you, Matt, for everything you guys do. And I'm sure you see the testimonials, but, just a chance to say thank you for all your work that has played out, for me and my family. But I always kind of wondered to say, like, I always thought I was the perfect customer avatar, but it sounds like I might be a bit of an outlier because I had this brand and I'm using all the resources to scale it, take it to the next level.
Well, we're immensely grateful for you. So first and foremost, thank you and believing in us and being just a fantastic member of the community and enriching that. Like we all benefit and learn something when folks like you show up and ask really great questions. I think you're less of an outlier maybe than you give yourself credit for, very positively. So again, in a sense where you started as a service guy and you've done really well and you've grown an agency, you've sold an agency, and now you're becoming, and not trying to put, maybe labels in your mouth, but, more of like the creator, the teacher, right? You still have services, you do coaching and you have a community element, but that's close to the mark in terms of that first kind of vector where, it's someone who already has the independence element or close to a full-time independence element, coming more from a services background and wanting to either transition / transform or just add to their service offering and getting into the community coaching and more like scalable and passive stuff.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, awesome, Matt. Final question for you. With SPI Pro, where do you see it going? You don't have to say anything that's set in stone or anything, but I'm just curious, as a member and as a community focused person, just like you, like, where do you think things are heading for online community in general and for Pro here over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I am on the record many times over for saying sincerely that community is at the center of our business model now. It's not just something we're going to teach and it's going to inform content. All of that is true, but at the epicenter of my business model and my strategic plan for the company over the next 2 to 3 years, especially because that's decently built out. We care about investing and scaling community. So that is more membership tiers. I've even shared here that we're launching 2 new ones coming up in just like a month or so, I think, based on when this podcast is dropping. We're very interested in then even going further into potentially what I will loosely call like group coaching, sort of stuff. I know I was riffing on that a little bit earlier. And you must just be prophetic because basically you already teased out my thoughts. Getting into something that even either related to the small group coaching stuff, or maybe it's proximal to it, which is like the in-person like meetup sort of things, not full scale events, but like something related to our community programming and our cohorts and our members, doing something for our higher end members that like really just gives back and has a new feel to it that you can only do in person. So all of that's still under the big tent of like community and how we think about growing SPI Pro. And then another thing that I think sits adjacent to all of these things that hasn't come up yet is this vision that I have around community as an asset to then pursue through partnership. So bringing the partnership factor back in, we do community really well. Like I feel very bullish in saying that. And I think we can back that up, that statement. So
totally.
I know a lot of people have interest in community as well, but maybe they don't have the time, the inclination, the resources, a combination of all that and other things to try to go build their own community, right? So in our own space, in our own industry, or even our own niche, can we partner with, you already have a community, but like, could we partner with someone else or a collection of other people that are kind of like you, that are, hey, I just want to be more like the influencer person, right? I have a big audience and maybe I have a couple online courses and I sell ads and that's great. And that's cool. But I also want community, but I don't want to build it out. Could we partner with them, and could SPI Pro become some version of their community? Could we have a carve out for like, their sort of teaching material or something? We provide the services of community design, community management, community operations, right? For them, right? So that's something that is more probably on the outer bound of that, 2 to 3 year vision in terms of like trying to figure out how to build that out and launch it. But I do think that our ability to scale community and consistent with our values is to selectively choose partnerships or even advisory sort of stuff, even that is like, okay, we can bring our our talent to bear in terms of, again, community design and community management to other creators doing great work in a similar capacity.
Gotcha. Wow. Fascinating stuff, man. That is super cool and really exciting. Speaking of community, I got a Q&A for my web design club coming up here, so I'll bounce here. But man, this was awesome, Matt. Dude, thank you so much for your time today and sharing, just being really Josh. Open about sharing what you learned. That's so super fun, man.
Thank you again for the time and having me on.
Awesome, man. Talk soon. Thanks, Matt. Hey friends, it's Josh here. I just wanted to mention a couple quick things before you head out. First off, if you've been enjoying the show, please consider leaving a podcast review. I personally read all the podcast reviews. I love hearing your thoughts and feedback on the show, and it also really helps grow this podcast. You can do that easily if you go to joshhall.co/podcast review, and you can leave a review wherever you listen to the show. And then I also wanted to make sure you know that for all the extras on every one of these podcast episodes, you can go to joshhall.co/podcast. We have a post there for every episode, which includes full transcriptions, timestamps, and all the links and resources that we mentioned. So just go to joshhall.co/podcast for all the extra goodies. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next episode.